position is that?
7.
7, is that yours? Oh, Bob. Oh.
I haven't decided yet.
Yeah. Well, I only gave him 10 minutes. So he has to be.
It's queued up.
He sure didn't run much of a campaign. Didn't even have any signs up.
And now he's not taking them back.
Yeah, right.
He has to.
By the front door is the only one I know.
Otherwise, the city will take him.
I don't think he cares. Let somebody else do the work.
Because we're like, yeah.
It's not a good way to start.
No.
Okay, Bill, we're gonna start, Bill. Bill?
He's going to find a trash.
Oh. Okay, it is 5:30 and we're gonna start the meeting. Could we have roll call?
Deputy Mayor Wells.
Excuse?
Councilmember Baggett.
Here.
Councilmember DeCoursey.
Here.
Councilmember Holman.
Here.
Councilmember Pelosa.
Present.
Councilmember Trout Manuel.
Here.
Councilmember Wagner.
Here.
Okay, do we have any modifications?
No chair.
Okay. We're gonna start out with the announcement, reports, and presentations. We're going to start with resolution number 5317.
This evening, Kevin Farah will be presenting the Police Department on the grant policy.
Okay.
Okay, good evening.
Oh,
For the record, Kevin Fuhrer, Assistant Finance Director. Thank you for the opportunity to present on this topic, which is an update of the Grants Management Administrative Policy. And what I'd like to do is provide you a brief background and then talk about some of the policy objectives, and then specifically to look at one section in the policy that pertains to each of you. These new federal requirements are a little different than what we've operated under the past. In 2014, the federal government came out with some new regulations that govern grant awards for local governments. And eventually they will supersede 3 federal circulars that are in existence right now and that form the basis for audits of federal programs. And in the state of Washington, those audits are conducted by the state auditor's office. The new federal requirements will come into play and be effective in December of 2017. They put a heavy emphasis on local award recipients having policies and procedures in place to ensure that the federal program monies are being used as intended, that they're being used efficiently, and that there are barriers in place to have any of those federal funds diverted for purposes in which the program never intended those to be used. So there's a bit of a background. What we have with the proposed policy is really putting a lot of emphasis on having the individuals that are responsible for carrying that program out aware of what the federal regulations are, how they go about putting controls in place to ensure that the city is complying with the program requirements, and finally to have the individuals that are responsible for that, if they do identify any cases of non-compliance, that they're aware of the steps that they need to take in form of notification to the federal agencies that, hey, we have an instance of non-compliance. So typically, we don't bring an administrative policy to the council, but in this case, the feds are requiring that we have some very strong language and verbatim language out of the federal guidance that governs code of conduct and conflicts of interest. And In the proposed policy, section 4.9 addresses that particular federal caveat. You can locate that at page 10 of your agenda packet. And specifically, what I'd like to look at is subsections 4.9.2, .3, and .4. And I'm going to step to the side here and grab my glasses. because I forgot my eyeglasses. And if you'll bear with me, I'll just read through these. It might make it a little bit easier. And please stop me at any point along the way if you have questions or concerns about that. But we'll start off with section 4.9.2. And that section states that no elected official, employee, or agent of the city shall participate in the selection, award, or administration of a contract supported by grant funds if a conflict of interest, real or apparent, would be involved. Such a conflict would arise when any of the following has a financial or other interest in the firm selected for the work. That includes the city employee, elected official, or agent, or any member of their immediate family, or their partner, or an organization which employs or is about to employ any of the above. Is that Councilmember Wagner? Yes, sir.
What is other interest to cover?
Other interest, that is a great question. So you could have a direct, obviously the direct financial, but you could also say have stock ownership in a firm.
Could we ask our attorney?
That's even better.
Well, I would have probably given the exact same answer that Kevin did. It could mean another interest that's not previously identified, and it could be some type of a shareholder interest or an option even.
But it means financial, it doesn't mean interest, period.
It's not, it would not be construed as somebody who has an interest in seeing something or doing something. It'd be a financial or a possessory interest.
Okay.
Subsection 4.9.3, the City of Auburn's elected officials, employees, or agents shall neither solicit nor accept gratuities, favors, or anything of monetary value from contractors, potential contractors, or subcontractors. So this is a bit more restrictive than what our Auburn City Code section, I think it's 2.92, which is a code of ethics where it does permit de minimis, I think it's less than $50 items to be accepted. So the feds say nothing at all. And then finally, to close it out with subsection 4.9.4, to the extent permitted by federal, state, or local laws or regulations, violation of these standards may cause penalties, sanctions, or other disciplinary actions to be taken against the city's elected officials, employees, or agents, or the contractors, potential contractors, subcontractors, or their agents. Any potential conflict of interest will be disclosed in writing to the federal award agency or pass-through entity, and that would be, for instance, if the State Department of Transportation is passing through federal highway dollars, that's who they're referring to, and in accordance with applicable federal awarding agency policy. So, any questions on that? I know that was a bit to absorb.
Kevin?
Councilmember
Yes, sir.
Wagner?
The thing I wonder about is, what about partnerships like the MIT, when we do a road project, we're both contributing, we're both managing it, and it's getting federal dollars. So they don't come, I don't think you could call them a contractor, but maybe a lawyer would. So can we have a lunch with the tribe or not?
Well, we certainly wouldn't be able to use federal grant monies for that. So typically, those awards we get reimbursed for money that we put out the door. So we would have to definitely exclude those types of activities. We couldn't claim that as a reimbursable federal expense, would be my initial response to it. Okay, and then just to close it out, so it is a bit of a change. It is something that Shelley has vetted with the department directors, so they know that there is change on the horizon. We also checked in with the local state auditor's office representative. Want to just make sure that what we were proposing would pass muster with them, and we got a positive response from them as well. So, and then finally, just to close it out, so the due date is coming up. In fact, it's December 25th of 2017 that we have a policy in place that will meet these new federal requirements. And so I wanted to leave you with that, and I'm happy to entertain any further questions that you may have.
Does anyone have any further questions for Kevin? Councilmember
Can
Holman?
you expect this at next council's meeting?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Any further questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Now we'll do Resolution 5326. Mrs. Coleman, Director Coleman.
Good evening. Well, before you here this evening to look at is a proposed addendum to our contract with Auburn Valley Humane Society, and in additional to animal housing services and other services they perform on the contract, this addendum is related to animal licensing services. Currently, the city manages the licensing. We do have a vendor, a third-party vendor that we encourage people to license their animals through, but we do take payments here at the city. ABHS also sells licenses on our behalf. Our license sales, the city isn't as close to these activities as ABHS is, so we're proposing this addendum to the agreement to allow them about the first of the year begin processing licenses for animals living within the city of Auburn. Our current contract that we have with Pet Data, they're required to have a 3-month notice. So we figure that this will kind of, if we start this contract up about the first of the year, and they'll start transmitting data, and we'll phase Pet Data out, and we'll bring ABHS in, and they will start issuing licenses, so there'll be a phase-out period with Pet Data. We put some things in here. There's a variable cost and a fixed cost to this contract. The fixed costs are associated around mailing, the cost of the license, some flyers and printing. That it's per license. I think it's $5.55, if I remember correctly, per license. And then there is a annual fee of $140,250 and a one-time $7,500 fee for setup. That's for they're going to use a service called Pet Point, and that's to set up their credit card recipient and able to take credit cards for selling licenses. And the credit card revenues will come directly into the city, and any licenses, if we still sell 4 licenses on behalf of ABHS, we'll receive those revenues directly in, but we'll give them the information, and they'll deposit into our account once a week and provide us reports.
Councilmember Baggett.
Shelley, do we know what the cost is to the city right now for doing that?
Yes, and right now it's a little bit less, but over 3-year time, 2-year, 3-year time, it starts to even out, and we come out a bit ahead. But we have run those analysis, and we need this 18% average per year increase is required for us to break even and come out a bit ahead. If they generate that increase in sales, the revenues will come in.
Councilmember Pelosi.
Shelley,
Yes.
now that we do not have an official animal control officer, and the police department officers are doing the process of animals in the city, how's that working out?
Well, I'm not involved with the animal control officer. That is done through was done through the police department. I think that if you spoke with Phil, that he would like to see some activity, and I'll let the chief respond to that.
Yeah, we're currently working with HR to fill 2 positions, and it just takes some time. Right now, officers are responding and handling those calls. It's not something that we want to have happen, but it's what we have to do to get the job done. And we just looked over one candidate, and hopefully maybe by the end of the year, another candidate maybe in February as time takes to get people on board. But we're pushing hard, looking through people, trying to get the community quality people who will have a desire to stay here and enjoy the community and work hard. So we're working on it.
So you said 2,
Yes,
so we're going to up it by 1.
yes,
Great,
we're very excited about that.
that's great. Yeah.
You said there was someone else here that would talk on that?
I don't, no. Phil's out of
Okay.
town,
And Phil, we're here.
and
Okay.
Rick Oliveira was going to try to make it if he could, and I do not see him here. But Phil did share with me that he spoke with Councilmember Pelosa, and Phil has looked at this contract, he has provided input on this contract, and he has told me that he is good with this contract, or addendum.
Can I ask who Phil
Mr.
is?
Yeah. Who is
Who is Phil?
Phil Morgan is the Executive Director of Auburn Valley Humane Society.
Councilmember DeCoursey.
Shelley, have we specified the frequency of the reports that the animal shelter, the service will provide for us?
The reports on the service, on addendum.
The number of licenses sold, right?
Yes, that is in the scope of services, Exhibit 1, and they will provide a monthly report by the 10th business day of the subsequent month. That's item number 10.
Okay.
This is pretty detailed.
Okay, that's it.
Yeah. We wanted it to be very detailed because Phil Morgan's very detailed.
Councilmember Pelosa.
So is the city, does this have any effect on the city having an employee with the board, the Humane Society Board of Directors?
Well, I don't believe so.
Okay.
The
Part
city,
of the contract.
that's part of the contract
Yeah.
because the city is such a big
That won't change.
funder of the operation.
Is Director Snyder still on that board?
He is.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Is there any further questions?
I plan on bringing this back at the next council meeting for approval.
Thank you, Shelley.
You're welcome.
We're going to move on to ordinance number 6664, property tax levy.
There it is. There we go. All right, before you is the ordinance for the property tax levy for the 2018 taxing year. This is a one sheet, one page that is also summarized in the memorandum. We are, assessed value has, since we spoke a few weeks ago, I guess it was a month, we spoke in September, late September, and our assessed value has increased a couple $100 million since that time. Currently, on the most recent worksheet that we received, the new construction and improvements had increased a bit over the previous time, but again, we're putting a plug-in of 150. It's actually sitting about 130 million right now. But they won't complete all their assessed value for new construction until December. So we want to, if it doesn't come in at 150, we'll just be levied a little bit less than that. We'll get what it is. But if we don't cover that new construction number, we won't get it. We won't get the property tax levy on that new construction. So it's estimated a little bit on the high side there, just in case. We have a 1% increase over our 2017 levy. It's about $210,000. That's what the 1% gets us, and we do get the new construction, and there's a little refund or re-levy. The re-levies are when someone contests their property tax bill or their assessed value that they're being taxed on, and the county provides them that waiver or reduces their assessed value. So therefore, the city does not get those funds. So we're allowed to re-levy that portion, and this is the amount. It's about $19,000, $20,000. And the levy rate per thousand is just a little bit over $2.04 for 2018. If assessed value or new construction goes up more, it'll be less.
I have any questions?
I do. So how is the $2.04 determined?
It is determined by dividing the dollars levied, the 21,548,000, by the assessed value divided by 1,000. Divide the assessed value by 1,000, then you divide that into the 21,548.
The, your handout didn't have the $2.04.
Oh,
That's,
oh, I didn't change, what do I have on the handout?
well, it's just the.
Oh, I didn't have that included.
No, and so that's why.
All right. Well, then, that's some additional information for you.
Absolutely. Valuable.
So no further questions, then we'll move on to the next one. Thank you.
Okay, this is the mid-biennium correction. When we discussed this in late September, we brought it forward. Since that time, there have been a few changes. As time rolls on, things change. And there have been, in red, you will notice the changes in red. And one of the things were the public art program that was already underway, as well as the 10th Green and Surrounds Rebuild Project. If you recall, that REAP funding was stripped for the streets after the discussions of the $20 ad hoc committee tab fee. So this restores that funding using additional REAP money that has been unappropriated and it's available. It also adds some budget for some work that needs to be done at the parking garage across the street. We're going to paint it. It's due for a paint job. And also there's going to be some ramp repair where there's some exposed rebar up on the top, and it's going to have some structural repair there to cover that up and cut out the rusting rebar that's exposed.
Are we the owners of the garage, or do we co-own it with the hospital?
We co-own it with the hospital.
And so do they pick up similar for?
Oh, yes, this is our share. And our share is, well, the general fund portion, plus we've got a little bit out into the utilities. I think it's about 100, and in total, it's about $120,000, maybe 130.
Is it going to be painted the same color?
You know, we're having a meeting next month. The condo owners are meeting next month, and that is going to be a
Is the
topic.
council going to have an opportunity to weigh in on the colors? Just kidding.
It's going to be purple.
Oh,
Is that okay?
Barney comes back.
Oh, you remember that?
Oh, yes, oh, yes.
Yeah. So that will be a topic.
Are you finished with your presentation?
Well, I can be, but I just wanted to.
Mr.
I don't wanna
Pelosi,
get ahead
let
of
her
you.
finish.
Okay, I don't want to get ahead of you.
Thank
This,
you.
on page 34,
Okay,
fourth paragraph, last line, $465,400. Can you explain how that was derived?
these are previous items that were approved in previous budget amendments, and they include revenue adjustments. So it's some revenue and it's some expenses. I'm going to, I've lost my place here. The TV went off. Okay. This is revenue. Let me get down here. Okay. So revenue adjustments that are expected to continue into 2018, and those would be right here. You can see there's 500,000 in property tax, other taxes, so about almost $900,000 in additional revenues. But there's ongoing costs associated with the new administrative assistant FTE that was approved in BA number 2, and the corrections for unbudgeted items that weren't included. There were some staffing adjustments and technical corrections. Yeah, there's the revenues.
So is that chart considered the words "these items"? In that paragraph?
These items reduce the budgeted 2018 fund balance by $465,000, and they include, so it is the net effect of, well, this is actually, the net effect is 2.3 million of all of these items
No,
on
that's,
fund balance, and if you take the 23, oops. And I look at it as the net effect isn't 465,000. It is actually about just under 1.5 million.
So it-
Increases. It doesn't include the beginning fund balances. So we
Okay.
pulled forward beginning fund
It's
balances.
really not a big deal. You've got control of it, but, so could
Yes.
you, is that okay if I ask?
Yes,
another
go
question?
ahead.
So can you explain those three bullets, those three-line bullets?
Okay, the first bullet, this column right here, BA number 4 amendments. Those are revenue adjustments that are expected to continue into 2018. There's a property tax, we increased property taxes in 2017. We increased the interfund utility taxes, not that we increased the taxes on the funds, but we had underestimated them in the 17-18 budget. We have an intergovernmental revenue here. What this is associated with is our business incubator over here. This will be a grant from the port to help with the business licensing aspect of the.
Shelley, is that so noted in your detail? Is it in the detail?
Yes,
Then don't worry, that's okay.
it's on page
One of-
36.
One of my main questions is the second bullet, ongoing costs for the FTE. What's that about?
Okay.
Ongoing costs.
salary.
Those are, if we look on page 36 of 244, the ongoing costs have to do with, of the administrative assistant.
Salaries.
FTE. That's the administrative assistant in the administration in the mayor's office.
Well, it just, I know where an FTE is, and there's a.
So there's a salary involved. That's the
yeah, there's
ongoing
salary,
cost. That
right,
is the
but it's
ongoing cost.
ongoing costs. It's like the salary never ends.
Well, it doesn't
That's the way-
until they end.
If you look on page 36 of 244, under the mayor's office administration, it says new FTE,
Right.
93,200.
So does that mean that we're going to hire another
No.
administrator assistant?
You already approved the hiring earlier this year. The budgeting was through the end of this year, and now this budget is for next year. It's a salary, ongoing salary.
It's not another person.
Okay, all right.
Then the third bullet, corrections for unbudgeted items. What does that mean?
Okay,
Corrections for unbudgeted items.
That would be on page 36 of 244.
Okay.
They are under the finance department,
Right.
85,100. These are all have to do with the payroll module, budgeting module,
Okay.
and also adding time for the police officers for comp time, holidays, cash out.
Thanks.
Shelley, you had a pie chart up here a minute ago. What was that?
It's just a depiction. This does not include interfund transfers. This is just the revenues. Doesn't include transfers in. There's about $106,000, $107,000 of transfers in that aren't included in this. And this is the original budget of about 66 million. Here's the revised budget spending, revenues of almost 67, about 66.9 million. Was there a particular one you wanted to look at?
Shelley, I wanted to go back to the police department. I thought they already got the comp time and the holiday pay and stuff.
When we put together the 2017-2018 budget, it wasn't included in either 2017 or 2018, and it's ongoing. We noticed that we were running over on our salaries in the police department, so upon investigation, and this had been ongoing for a few years, and we adjusted the 2017 budget, and we did that in budget amendment number 1. And now we have to adjust the 2018 budget. And then when we do the next, the 1920 budget, we will be sure to include all these things in there.
Okay, thank you. Is there any further questions?
All right. Thank you.
Good job, Shelley.
Okay, resolution number 5319. Attorney Hyde.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the council. This is a recurring resolution, comes to you in a different form every year. And what precedes this is during the course of the year, the departments have fees associated with their activities, monitor and track those fees, and try to identify what those fees are in terms of assuring that the fees cover the costs. And that's why sometimes the fees don't all look the same, because they may have some areas where the fees were maybe better projected one year and not as well the next year, or something, or where they're trying to say, let's keep track of collectively the fees. For instance, a lot of the planning fees this year were adjusted by 3% because that's about as close as they can get to the need to make sure that the fees were covering the costs. And so that, again, this is probably something that every one of you has seen a number of different times in terms of a resolution. Why is it in the hands of the city attorney? Well, I probably have no fees that I'm individually involved in, even though the clerk's office and my department does. But because some years ago, they all used to be covered in an ordinance, and I had the good idea of putting them into a resolution. And therefore, it's stuck. But if there are any questions, and this is an easy one because you can anticipate that it'll happen every year.
Councilmember Pelosa and then Councilmember Wagner.
Out of the clerk's office, there's a charge of 15 cents per sheet that's reproduced. I called the clerk's office today, and apparently Danny is out. So I asked,
Sometimes the fees are set by statute, and that happens
Yeah.
to be one where.
oh, that is a statute?
The state law says
Oh.
that unless you have a justification that is specific to a particular dollar amount, the most you can charge is 15 cents per page.
Okay.
Copies.
Take care of my.
We may be losing money on that, but the statute
Yeah.
tells us what we can do.
So can you get that changed? Get the
The
statute changed?
Well, I have as much of a vote on the state legislature as you do, I think.
Councilmember Wagner.
I've got a couple of questions. The first one is the same thing on fees for public records. Do we still have large paper?
Mr. Wagner, what page are you on?
Well, I'm on the same thing, page 82, fees for public records. Do we still have the big rolled up paper copies of development plans, or does that all occur electronically now?
Well, a lot of it occurs electronically. I'm not saying that there couldn't be some files that still are located in that, but we're going to the electronic as much as we can.
But can we charge more when it's a
Well,
giant?
the statute actually covers that as well, and when there are digital things, we can sometimes charge a different amount if we can put them on a disk or some type of a digital form. But we're still stuck with, in public records, which is controlled to a significant degree by state law, we have less flexibility in that regard. We still have to use the formulas that the state law provides, but they have accommodated digital forms that didn't used to exist.
I have one other question, Chair.
Sure, go ahead.
Page 59, and this may not be a question you can answer, maybe one that Kevin has to answer, or we'll reserve for planning today. A third of the way down the page is an item called flexible development alternatives, where we're going from 1,173 to 1,208. Can somebody explain to me what that ordinance is all about, flexible development?
Well, I'm sure somebody can, and it's going to have to be Jeff or Kevin.
This is related to the flexible development alternative?
Correct.
So, for those that remember, when we removed the language in our code pertaining to plan unit developments, council still wanted to provide an opportunity for flexible development. So we went through a process with Planning Commission and ultimately City Council to develop a new chapter in our zoning code, 1849, I believe, this flexible development alternatives. And that is a process that allows for certain flexibility in the application of zoning standards if you take certain actions. And so that particular fee is intended to represent a portion of the city's cost in conducting that review. Now, I will say to this point, we've had one party express interest in it, but we've had no one actually go through that process.
Can you forward me the ACC number so I can look at
Yes.
it?
Yeah, be happy to.
I have a question on the same page, and it's on the floodplain development permit level 3. It went from 258 to 540.
And I'm going to ask Jeff Tate to come up. His team was involved in updating these fees, and I think he'd be better positioned to answer the question than I would.
So it's actually kind of a reorganization of the types of floodplain permits that we've historically processed. So I'll note that the first floodplain development permit's called a level 1. It changes from 267 to 275. And then what's hard to track on this is the last of the floodplain permits. There's 4 categories there. It shows at 515. We're essentially breaking that 515 into 3 different types of floodplain permits. So when you see that strikeout, it says 258 to 540. It's really 515 to 540. It's just the way that we're recategorizing them. And I'll explain this real quick. So a floodplain level 1 permit is a very simple, straightforward permit. Floodplain level 2 is where a habitat assessment is required, and under endangered species laws, where we start have to evaluating habitat impacts within floodplain areas. And then level 3 is where not only do you do a habitat impact assessment, but you're actually impacting the waterway as well, and a hydraulic analysis is required, which we then have to outsource. We don't have the credentials, the certification to conduct that hydraulic analysis. So as it gets more complicated, it gets more expensive. Again, it's really breaking that $515 category of floodplain permit out into those 3 different categories: habitat assessment plus hydraulic analysis, and then the last category is when mitigation is actually required.
Thank you for clarifying that, because I was going to ask about the other 2 as well, so thank you. Is there any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, traffic impact fees.
Evening. So this is actually included in what you just reviewed as well, but this is a little bit more detail as to how we figured the traffic impact fees for 2018, which James will go through in more detail, but it's basically, it's based on the CIP, the TIP, that was created for 2018 through 2023, and the change in projects that happened there. So James will go through it in more detail.
Okay. So this is an annual update process we go through to adjust our impact fees to be consistent with our capacity project needs. As Ingrid said, earlier in the year, we went through and we revised the TIP to represent the 6-year period from 2018 to 2023. That was adopted by Resolution 5300 back at the end of June. Every year, as we complete projects, we take them off the TIP. We identify new project needs and we add those projects to the TIP. So it's always in a state of change year to year. Only a subset of all of the projects included in the TIP are represented in the traffic impact fee program. We only include projects that add new capacity in the impact fee program. There are a lot of other non-motorized, preservation, other types of projects in the TIP which aren't a part of the fee. And then further, we break down the total cost for all those projects into funded versus unfunded. We take out the balance that we already have in the traffic impact fee fund, so we're not double charging people for monies we've already collected. And then we also look at the portion of a project that's needed to add capacity to accommodate new development versus the city's responsibility to fix an existing problem that would be part of that project as well. So every project has kind of, it goes beyond just fixing the existing problem. It also creates capacity for new development as well. So we split the cost into our portion to fix an existing problem and the development's portion to create capacity to accommodate their development. So in the memo, you'll find somewhere at the back a list of the added and removed projects from the TIP.
On page 101.
So you'll see the majority of projects are carried over from last year. We added one new project, which is the A Street Loop project. and then we removed, it looks like 8 projects in total. One was combined with another project. 6 of them got completed, and 1 of them was an ongoing mitigation project, which has now been complete as well. So those are the changes in the project list.
Could you tell me where A Street Loop is?
Yes, the A Street Loop project would create a new roadway connection between Division Street and 4th Street Southwest, so where it loops around south of downtown. It would create a new east-west connection directly to A Street Southeast.
Immediately adjacent to the BNSF Stampede Pass line.
Okay.
And primarily for right turn movements only onto A Street. So it takes traffic off of the 3rd Street intersection with A Street and Division.
Okay. Thank you.
So that'll help with people getting out of downtown, and specifically the transit garage at the end of the day.
And that's been a concern. Been hearing a lot about that. So, okay, thank you.
Going back to the memo, you can see in Table 1 on the top of the 2nd page in the memo, which is page 95 in your packets, that summarizes how the costs have changed on an annual basis for the past several years. You can see that the total cost has increased slightly, but as has the unfunded growth cost, which is the portion of the projects which would be the responsibility of the development community to add capacity to allow their projects to move forwards, versus the difference between those two numbers would be the city's responsibility. So that would be about $40 million based on the projects in the TIP. That number is then split down to a trip level based on the number of growth trips that were forecast as part of the comprehensive plan update that was completed in 2015. So that's just over 16,000 trips. Additional trips are anticipated by 2035. That division then gives us the trip per fee that we would charge for new developments in 2018, which is estimated at $33,889.62. That's an increase of just over $65 from the current fee that's in effect this year, which represents about a 2% increase. The memo then goes on to talk about we have a separate fee schedule for Lakeland Hills and a reduced fee schedule for projects that are in the downtown urban center. The downtown urban center, there's a map which shows the area that's covered by that on page 97 in the packet. That hasn't changed from previous years. The memo talks about the reductions by different land use categories for projects in that area, and that's to account for lower vehicle trip generation because of the built-out pedestrian and non-motorized improvements and proximity to transit service compared to other areas in town.
Councilmember Pelosa has a question.
Can you explain the rationale of a trip? And how you must have a formula or something?
Yeah, we rely on the Institute of Transportation Engineers has a document called the Trip Generation Handbook, which is a compendium of trip generation data for projects around the country by land use category. So there's commercial, there's retail, recreational, residential. So every category that they've identified based on the data that's been collected has a rate. So for every 1,000 square feet of a particular land use, it is estimated to generate X number of trips during the PMPCAR, which is what we're concerned about for the impact fee program. So all of our trip generation data comes from that document.
So that's an engineering standard national level document that we use, and that's been adopted in the past to create that traffic impact fee calculation from.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Sure.
How much difference is Lakeland Hills according to the others?
The Lakeland Hills rates are considerably lower than the rates elsewhere. If you go to the strike-through table on page 100, that summarizes the fees for Lakeland Hills, and you can compare those to the fees that are in the previous 2 pages, which are the citywide fees. So for example, for a detached single-family residence, the Lakeland Hills fee is just over $1,300. Elsewhere in the city, the single-family residential fee is just over $4,500, and then with the downtown reduction, it's just under $3,700. The reason the Lakeland Hills fees are so much lower is because of the improvements that were built specifically to support that development as part of the development. So they've been given a credit for all of the things that they built back then, which is why that fee's lower.
Is there any answer? You can keep going if you have more to tell us.
The Lakeland Hills fee has been updated again this year per the resolutions and ordinance that created that fee. They're updated on an annual basis based on the consumer price index for the Seattle metropolitan area, which has experienced about a 2.6% increase in the past 12 months. So that's reflected in the fees in the table. And then lastly, there is a comparison table on page 102, which shows you how City of Auburn's base fee compares with those charged by other jurisdictions throughout the state. You can see that we're about a third of the way down from the top, just below Federal Way, just above Kirkland. That gives you kind of an idea of how we compare with others around us. We're generally consistent, somewhat comparable, yeah.
Okay.
That's all I have to talk about, so if anybody has any questions.
Any further questions? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Nice meeting. Next is our regional fire department. Please, is that?
Good evening. For the record, Assistant Director of Community Development, Jeff Tate, and to my left is Kevin Olson from Valley Regional Fire Authority and Larry Upton.
Good evening.
I prepared a transmittal memorandum to Council in preparation for the discussion, and I'll spend 3 or 4 minutes just going over a couple maybe high-level points and then turn it over to the experts next to me. The discussion that's in front of Council this evening is the VRFA fee schedule, and a couple things to kind of just point out or highlight here real quick. First of all, I think as of course everyone on Council knows, and for the viewing audience, Valley Regional Fire Authority is a separate agency, separate municipal government than the City of Auburn. But much like school district impact fees come before City Council for action before we start collecting school district impact fees, so too do Valley Regional Fire Authority fees. So you're accustomed to receiving a briefing every year along with a draft resolution for school district impact fees, and every year we look at 4 different school districts, and of course they're separate agencies as well. So it's comparable from that perspective. Another point to highlight is that in the memorandum indicated that VRFA hasn't modified their fees since 2008. So Council may recall last year that we had a conversation for city fees. We had kind of been through a fee stabilization period where fees hadn't really been touched for quite some time. So VRFA is looking at, has gone through a similar process as well. And then the last point that I'd make is that, again, similar to city government, there's ratepayers that are in the benefit area for VRFA. We all pay, those of us who live in the benefit area, we all pay taxes for VRFA services, just like we all pay taxes to the city of Auburn for city services. But VRFA, like the city of Auburn, provides direct service for customers seeking a very direct need, namely in this case permitting and plan review and inspection. So much like you have to come to the city and obtain a permit and pay for that service directly, the rest of the taxpayers in the city don't subsidize that service, at least fully. It's similar for VRFA as well. There's ratepayers within the benefit area, and then there's direct customer service services as well. So with that, I'll turn it over to Kevin and Larry to add any more that they may like to add.
Great, thank you. Couple things I'd like to point out. First, our Fire Marshal Karen Stewart unfortunately couldn't be here tonight, but she's put about a year into kind of redeveloping our fee schedule. So it's been a very long process. There's been a lot of thought put into it. She used NFPA 1730 for calculating all of the fees that are in there. So we feel very strongly that they're responsible and they're accurate. And if you want to turn to page 118, I just wanted to kind of point out kind of what that breakdown means so that you can, might help you to understand it. So yeah, you're looking at 118 would be the VRFA fee schedule 2008-2018 comparison. So the white section up there kind of represents a project with a typical plan review. And if you look at the columns, you'll see the 2008 application fee. So those first three columns there kind of break down what the fees would have been with our 2008 schedule. And then if you look at the next columns, you have the 2018 application fee, the device fee, permit fee, and 2018 total fees. And so if you look at the final column there on the right in the white, you can see the breakdown of where how the fees differ. So you can see three columns went up, one actually went down, and one remained the same. So it just kind of gives you an idea of kind of a comparison using like going through the actual process of doing a plan review. If you look at the next section, the gray section, that's Merrill Gardens, so a $17 million project. And if you just scroll down to the bottom line, you can see using the 2008 fee schedule, they'd be looking at almost $29,000. And using the 2018 fee schedule would be just over 30,000. So again, on a very large project there, you have a very small difference. That'd be about $1,277 or $1,277. And then the last column there is using an H facility, which there's only about 4 true H facilities in the city of Auburn. And these are very time consuming. These are H facilities are hazard facilities, high hazard facilities, so they're very important to do those very accurately and really look at those closely, so they're a lot more time consuming. And you can see there's a pretty significant difference, again, using a much smaller valuated project, which is Imaginetics, which is $170,000, but you've got about a $1,400 difference. And again, that's just because we've changed to an hourly rate, and this is just very time consuming. And then lastly, something that you don't have that we just received here at the end of last week. When we met with Jeff and Kevin, they thought it would, and Mayor Backus, they thought it would be a good idea if we took a project and did a comparison so that we could accurately portray to the council what it would cost for a like project in the VRFA service area, South King Fire and Rescue and Puget Sound Fire. So we took a comparison. The valuation of the project was $600,000. The sprinkler was valued at $2,500, and the fire alarm was valued at $2,500. The VRFA for completing that work using the 2018 fee schedule would be at $2,201.95. Puget Sound Fire, which is Kent, would be $4,657, and South King would be $2,226.21. So you can see we're very, very close to South King, and then Puget Sound Fire's quite a bit higher.
Would you be sending those out to us?
Yeah, I can
Those
send that to
figures?
you, absolutely.
Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
And with that, I'll turn it over and answer any questions that you may have.
Councilmember DeCoursey.
Kevin, it's on page 114. Line item 4.2, the business license review. I think I recall it was the governance meeting, there was an actual cost associated with that, and it's shown as included with fire benefit charge.
Yep.
Is there an additional charge for the fire benefit charge, or is it all the same that the business or firm would pay within the fire benefit charge?
Yeah, so again, through our meetings with the three cities, we recognized that there was a couple of what we would call fatal flaws in the fee schedule. And we, after the Board of Governance meeting, I felt pretty strongly that we didn't want to add a significant charge to something that's already being done. And there's a lot of new business licenses that are issued within the city of Auburn. And so we felt that the most responsible thing to do would be to remove the costs that we had associated with the new business license so that we didn't have a negative impact with our customers.
So in the process of the fire benefit charge, and there's no upcharge in fire benefit charge as part of it?
It's part of it. Anything that says included in the fire service benefit charge, that is a fee, as Jeff noted, that everybody pays, and that has nothing to do with additional services that we provide outside of fire and EMS.
Thank you, and thank you for doing that.
Yeah, you bet.
Councilmember Wagner.
When we first formed the VRFA, I remember our professionals telling us that this whole thing was based on the amount of water it takes to put out a particular kind of fire. And that gave you a relative ranking, even though there were other factors that went in if it was a special case. But is that amount of water still the way that they're ranked?
So, yes, the fire flow formula is calculated within the fire service benefit charge. So that calculation that they use is based on, in part, fire flow. So a much larger building that takes a lot more water to put out a fire would pay a higher fee than a residence.
And the national outfit that generated those numbers, do they update those occasionally?
There's a lot of different fire flow formulas, but no, I don't believe that they've been updated. I think there's a couple of different formulas that are typically used, but no, they've been pretty consistent. It's math, yeah. Math.
But you know, new technology like telescopics come along, and you'd think that might change the amount of water you.
Well, the water it's not based on not necessarily based. The fire flow doesn't figure out how much your engine could pump. It's basically the amount of water it takes to suppress the fire. So that's
my point. I think a telescope would be a lot more effective than something from the ground. And so those kinds of new technologies, that's just an example, you would think would cause these relative numbers
formulas
to change.
To drop a little bit. Yeah, I mean, it definitely could.
Okay. I have a question on page 107, fireworks display permits. How many of those does the city of Auburn sell?
The fireworks display permits are usually for like Emerald Downs for the display they do over there. There's not a whole lot of fireworks displays. I mean, they pretty much have the bracket on that over there. So, and we try to keep it all in one area. So they're not going on all over the city with everybody get their own display permit.
And I think there's been one or two that maybe the school district has applied for a graduation ceremony or something like that, but they're pretty, it's one or two a year.
Yeah, it's minimal.
Okay, I just was wondering, because I thought that the only ones we had were the mucko shoots. I wasn't sure if there was any other ones out here, so, all right, thank you. Is there any other questions? I guess not. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ordinance 6659.
Good afternoon again, Madam Chair and members of the council. This ordinance would seek to put in place in the city of Auburn an ordinance that would make a crime for a person to violate an order saying you had to stay out of an area of drug activity. Why is it an ordinance rather than just a court order? It depends upon a court order, because the violation is if once a court orders a person to stay out of that, which would be the product of them going to court and violating drug violation, the court then says, okay, as a condition of this adjudication of this violation, you're to stay out of areas of drug enforcement. That then becomes a violation of the law, an ordinance, misdemeanor ordinance, if a person who has been ordered to stay out violates the law. That's the tool. It's used in a number of different cities. I included a large collection of ordinances from different cities. And how did it come into place? The police, planning, parks, and legal have been meeting for a while, trying to identify how we wish to structure this ordinance to bring it to you. And that includes working with the police to make sure that the police have good buy-in in terms of the areas that they identify as being problem areas. It also includes parks too, because parks is very well affected by problems that occur within the city parks. And we fashioned it after a collection of different ordinances, and that's the reason we gave you so very many ordinances to look at. This is not something out of the ordinary or unusual, but it is a good tool that's valuable to the police and to the community and to the parks and all the people that would be affected by recurring illegal drug activities. And if there are other questions, or if you have any specific questions about the language, I can help you, but if there are other questions in terms of the motivation, then we've got representatives from the police department and parks and planning. And
No, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Mr. Pelosi.
So the purpose of this whole ordinance then is to identify parks that we do not want drug activity. Is that the purpose of it?
Parts of the city, not just parks, but it's parts of the city too. We have certain areas. Okay. And so what we worked on with this collection of the representatives of the various affected departments is identifying where in the city we're having problems that would warrant additional efforts. And we checked with a number of different jurisdictions that are using this tool. Everybody seems to be very, or at least the reports we got back were those that were using it were very happy to have it. It doesn't mean it comes into play every time, but if you have a person who is violating illegal drug laws in certain areas, and we can require them to stay out of that as a court-ordered part, and a violation becomes a separate municipal offense, violation, misdemeanor offense under our code, which is why you need to make sure that this is something you are involved in, because you're the ones that make that decision. So, then we can control that.
So Dan, do they say, like up where I live, we've been having a lot of issues up there, and some of those people have family members that live up there. Will that keep them from being able to go see their families if they had several?
This is what I would say, the experience we have received at word from cities using this. Courts tend to be reluctant to tell somebody they cannot go home. But if you don't live there, you can be ordered as a condition of a previous violation to stay out of that area. And so it may not be a perfect tool across the board in every situation, because you really don't want to say, hey, you may be paying rent, or you may be having all your belongings there, and you can't go back there. That's not what courts have been comfortable to do. But other than that, it is a tool.
Councilmember Wagner?
Well, that was kind of the gist of the question I had too, was that somebody lives there, you're saying they can go back, but if it's just to go visit relatives, they can't. Is that what you just told us?
That's technically what could be the result. The violation is dependent upon a couple of prerequisites. First of all, that it's in our code. Secondly, that a court orders such a restriction or condition based upon a prosecution of an underlying drug violation. Somebody goes to court, they can be ordered to stay out of certain areas. All I'm saying is from the experience of people we've talked to, courts have been reluctant, and reasonably so, I suspect, reluctant to tell somebody that they cannot go into a certain area if that's a certain area in which they live.
Councilmember Pelosi and then Councilmember DeCoursey.
So this is coming to the council next Monday, I presume, for approval.
Correct.
So once it's approved, I didn't read every line in here, but does it cover posting signage in the areas that, to warn people?
No, but they would not need to have anything posted, because they would have the court order them. They'd have a court order saying you cannot go into this particular area, and then the area can be identified through the court order rather than some sign out in front of somebody's house.
Well, why don't we be more proactive and post signage?
Well, you know, I'm going to tell you that may not be the controlling thing. The controlling subsequent violation would be if a person who violated the law was ordered as a condition of the sentence on the earlier violation to stay out of a certain area. That order, not the sign, would be the trigger. If we ever put ourselves in a position where we wanted to put signs up all over the city, it may be less than a positive message, but it may not be necessary.
Do other cities that apply this type of ordinance, do other cities have signs in their parks?
Well, of the people with whom we had specific contact, nobody indicated having a sign. None of the ordinances appear to have sign requirements.
Could we ask the question?
Well, I could ask the question. However, I will tell you, the ordinances did not require, the ordinances that, if they don't require a sign, my suspicion is the city's not going to probably go out and create hundreds and hundreds of dollars worth of signs.
Yeah, but it might be a prevention.
Well, you know, that's not how it's been used. I'm not going to say there couldn't be a value in signs, but I would say every single park is included, so then 200 and some parks, how many?
I wish, no, 37.
Well, I think we have more than 37 listed in our
We do,
collection.
in that we do. Chief Lee?
Yeah, the law itself prohibits drug use, and therefore, you know, I'm not sure we need signage on all of these places. If we find them, arrest them for drug paraphernalia, drug use, and the court order issues that order, we're good with preventing them from coming back or arresting them if they come back.
And every one of these court orders is individual. They're not a sheet of paper that just you tear it off and give it to everybody that comes in. The judge has to make a decision based upon the particular adjudication of the violation that this person is going to be restricted from going into these areas, or maybe some of them.
Councilmember Holman.
I have some familiarity with a different form of this called a SOAP, stay out of areas of prostitution. But it only becomes effective once the person has been arrested for that type of crime and then for future occurrences. And so we know our frequent flyers, and if you see someone that has a prior conviction and a soap order, or in this case a soda order, and they're in a park that you know, you can just pop them right there. So it's a tool, but it does not apply, it's not a warning as much as it is a tool for police agencies, police officers to use to arrest someone who's going back to their old haunts.
Councilmember DeCoursey and then Councilmember Wagner.
A question or two and then a comment or two. So Dan, when we have the court order, it seems to me the judge would stipulate particularly whether or not an individual could be at a certain area. For example, they don't live at a place, but they have relatives there, but that's an area they can't frequent, so they're told by court order they can't be there.
That's correct. And in fact, in the process where the judge makes that ruling, if the defendant has some reason that the court wouldn't know about that might require him to be able to go into that, he has the opportunity, or she has the opportunity to explain that to the court, and the court can adjust the order to make it fit.
The other question I have is, as a police agency, with those court orders, are they detailed enough where we would actually know when we take a person into custody or ask the questions that that's exactly what it says? The other thing I like here is that we have on pages 123, 124, 124, 125, 126, we provide the legal description of the three areas, and then we provide the list in area 4 of the city park property. What I saw in the other local jurisdictions, what they provided is that they have actually a photograph or representation of those areas. I think this would be something we should look at, give a better identification for folks, because if we're looking at, let's just say Game Farm Park, that covers a huge area. Is it specifically, you can't be in Game Farm Park, you can't be this side, that side, whatever, but I think it would be very good to have this type of a visual in this process for us, so we can specifically identify the location and the areas within the location.
Well, and let me tell you why we went the way we went, because the maps, as good a tool as they are to give you a general description, are maps that don't necessarily give you the detail for the larger areas that the absolutely crisp descriptions can, other than the parks perhaps.
I don't disagree with that, but when I read a legal description for an area, I'm reading a legal description. I'm not reading, like it says in this particular one on page 153, east from the intersection or south from 17th Street. It gives us very specific locations, where if I'm looking at a legal description beginning, northerly, how would we say it here, beginning at the intersection, to me, it's just more visual representation makes it more clear and more identifiable. Just a comment related to that. So
You're just asking for an addition.
Yes.
To the legal description.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. I don't mean to preclude possibilities, but would the map that said as generally depicted, because again, a map still.
Yeah, I think that's fine. To me, it's more the visual than the written.
Okay, we could do both, but I wouldn't want to create an inconsistency.
No, and I wouldn't say so specific that you can't walk on this side of the street or on this center line of the street.
We actually include the entire streets of any.
Exactly. So I'm saying
budding.
And
as detailed as we can without being overly specific.
I like how they did the Muckleshoot Casino area. Every street that you have on here I agree with because I see it all the time. Muckleshoots now are cleaning up, they're cutting down trees and cutting down bushes so that way no one can hang out and sleep there or lay there and stuff like that. They're just cleaning that whole area.
When I read something like thence easterly along the north line, it said Sherman Acres. That's a little problematic.
Okay, okay.
You know, we actually worked hard on that with our city surveyors to make sure that everything closed.
Councilmember Wagner and then Councilmember Pelosa.
Well, I hate to bring this up since you put so much effort into those kinds of descriptions, but these look like pretty irregular areas for a police officer to try to think about. Why wouldn't you round off some of these little
Well, the police
tags
helped
that-
me out. The police were involved in identifying those specific areas, and maybe the answer I'll give you is it is not necessarily helpful to include areas that might be right next to a problem area if it is in itself not a problem area. So we worked with the police and the planning and the parks to identify those areas that we felt needed to be targeted, and they are not, they're not very geometrically pretty or consistent or precise or uniform, but they are where the problem areas were identified. And that's what was identified, that's what was described in the ordinance text.
But I look at like this little tag out of the purple one here. There are streets right coming off of that the people can't go there, they'll just go half a block away on the streets that are contained in that
Well,
little tag.
and it may very well be that, that if people are told they cannot go one place, we may need to adjust, and I'd be discouraged if we're just gonna see you push on the bubble, it pop out somewhere else, but that could happen. And that's actually one of the reasons why we work so hard on trying to identify what should or should not be included. Because, for instance, not all of our parks right now see the same problems, but we don't want them to become havens for those problems that others do see. And again, this was a joint effort. The police were involved in the mapping, planning was involved in the mapping, and of course, Parks was certainly involved in identifying what should be included.
So when your prosecutor goes before a judge and says, I want this guy kept out of area orange, I mean, how does that come across? Are these gonna have names and titles or what?
The areas are identified in the ordinance, and the court could actually just incorporate that text right into its ordinance.
Let's see.
Councilmember Pelosa.
I was, you identified 5 areas. And did you consider using the police districts, the 6 districts?
Well, you know, I don't know that we want to do the entire districts because that would pretty much be the whole city. You know, so what we tried to do, and this was the focus, is to try to identify those areas in the city that are or were concerned about becoming these problem areas so that we can actually get some legitimacy to it. If we did the entire police districts, we might run into an even greater problem with courts being reluctant to add too broad of a prohibition in a court order.
Okay. Councilmember Holman.
John will work too.
Get it?
Where we run into, where we could run into problem with this is just like Council Hyde just referred to, as we can run into difficulty with the courts for overreach. It has to be narrowly defined, otherwise the courts would take a very dim view and either strike it down or not use it to enforce. And you were absolutely correct. It is a bit like playing whack-a-mole, that they will move. And then something else is added, but it will be because of actual knowledge of where this type of activity is going on. And so, yeah, you do a bit of whack-a-mole. The SOAP area that I was first involved with was Highway 99 out in front of CTAP. And literally, when we started enforcing SOAP out there, prostitution moved off of Highway 99, but it moved up over to Military Road and a couple other locations. But it's an effective tool. Just don't make it too big or it'll never get used.
No, I have to confess, from now on, I'm going to be thinking of whack-a-mole rather than
Whack-a-mole,
Councilmember
frequent flyer.
Pelosi.
Sorry.
The Lee Hill Skateboard Park, I don't see it on here. Is it on here?
Lee Hill Park.
Oh, Lee Hill Park, as you call it. Yeah. It is here. Lee Hill.
Okay, any further questions, or we're going to take until 7 o'clock break. Is that long? I know. Okay, see you back at 7.
Oh, yeah. Good start. Amen. Thanks.
You bet.
Walk around, buddy. Stretch it out.
I've been stretched enough. Now, when I go to get out of this chair, I may have to have some help.
I see that. I saw that. Oops.
Already been there.
Yeah, I was on, going inch by inch, because down below is 20 feet.
Yeah.
And it was gusty.
Yeah, I had a couple of friends of mine fall off ladders and stuff. You're talking about cleaning your gutters? Yeah. And they were
Say what you want to say.
stuff. So, you have to also be very much aware of what's down below you.
This has been such a dirty tree year because of our long, hot summer.
And you got this wind and the rain and everything is just adding to it.
This has been, we've been up there 17 years. This has been the worst ever. I mean, ever. Like last year, I was only up on the roof twice during the fall, winter.
Well, next year you might
This is heavy.
Well, yeah, but it
Some
was
of
just, everybody wanted to be able to have their own areas.
Are you ready?
Well,
We're
no.
ready to come back to
It's the only
order.
reason I ever brought it up.
Yeah, yeah.
It's pretty cool, but everyone actually does get a benefit.
Yolanda, you know, we had one other, Mayor said, we had one other item.
Item I. Boca. I didn't see
It's
the
up to you,
I.
I just didn't want you to forget it.
No, I didn't. Boca, I missed one item. Can
We can-
the next item and then I apologize.
Should we just sit here or get up?
Well, no,
Or someone else is,
There, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, they
We'll
could
get up
just be comfortable.
and come back.
Okay, item, the next one is, it's not on here, I don't have it.
Very bottom.
Am
Frequency.
I? Right here.
I know, but I don't have anything on it.
There isn't
Okay.
anything, it's discussion.
Okay, we have a discussion of frequency and special focus area.
I'll say a few words.
Okay, say a few words.
I brought this up a couple months ago. But you know, after I've thought about it a while, if someone, any of us, of the Magnificent Seven, any of us, have an item that's really you want to push, you want to bring up, we can bring that up on any study session. You know what I mean? And I think we discussed that way back when, but it's kind of drifted away. And that was my only thrust. And the mayor, she brought it up once and or a couple times. But I think we can. I personally think we can handle this as they come up and add them to a study session.
John?
I think my colleague, Mr. Pelosi, is spot on. We're comfortable enough with it now that if something came up of great interest, we can bring it up under general topics, and that individual would still lead the discussion.
And we did that a few weeks ago. We prioritized an item, and we took one or two off, remember? To move this prioritized item in, so.
Mr. Wagner, do you have anything to say?
I'm comfortable the way it is, but I'm a short timer, so I
That's
shouldn't
right,
have much
that's
of a vote.
right. That's right. Claude?
No, I agree with that. I think it's good because that's how it was originally developed, was have those general discussion items where if we had something of significance or importance that needed to be discussed out of sequence of the special focus areas, and that was brought up at that time. I think, again, it's also important that the chairs of the special focus areas, along with staff, look at those items and look at the items that are of significance that we need to discuss. I think there's an opportunity, if we have other items where we need to get together with staff, with the mayor, and kind of run through it and perhaps decide at that time whether or not it's something that comes before the study session. We need to look at that as well. But then Rich and I had our meeting with the staff today for Public Works and Community Development, and there's a long agenda item list of things that carries us through February of next year. And we're looking at the December meeting of having about a 2-hour Public Works Community Development focus area for the study session for that night. But all those items are not only important, but they're very critical in some of our future decision-making as well. So I think as all of us as chairs or vice chairs of those groups just need to recognize that and work hard to make sure we have the extremely important items or the most significant items coming forward for the study sessions.
Okay,
agree.
Mr. Baggett?
I agree.
Okay, I guess we're all on the same page, so,
yeah.
okay. All right.
Now we can turn the page.
Now we can go. And I'm going to go ahead and let you introduce yourselves, okay?
Thank you, sounds great. Thank you for inviting us here tonight to join you. My name is Bukta Reisar, and I work in the office of Dow Constantine. I joined at the beginning of this year to help figure out a strategy around immigration for King County and possibly an Office of Immigration, which I will get into with more details later on. But thank you for inviting me tonight.
Hey there, my name is Tim Warden-Hertz. I'm the directing attorney for the Tacoma office of the Northwest Immigrant Rights Project. I've been directing that office for about 4 years now. And I'll get into a little bit more about our organization. But again, thank you for having me to talk a little bit more about this issue.
So we have a presentation with some beautiful slides to show you. We thought that we would take a few minutes to walk you through. First of all, I'll share with you what King County is doing. What are some of the ordinances that we have in place already in King County and what else we're considering? And then Tim's going to talk about some of the recent news and its impact on immigrant communities, and then hopefully answer all of your questions. Is that all right? And how much time do you want us to take to have this discussion with you?
They told me you have 60 minutes, but if you want to cut it to 45 so we can have some questions. Okay.
We won't take that long.
We won't take that long.
Okay.
That sounds good to you? All right. So I think this works, the slides. All right. I'll read some of this in case the font is not big enough for you to see. But as you know, between 2000 and 2010, in the last census, King County has seen a tremendous growth in the number of immigrant and refugee communities. King County has gained more than 200,000 new residents, half of which were foreign-born in the county. And again, this is before the last census in 2010. New residents, this is through the Seattle public schools and some of the surrounding schools. We know that 170 languages are spoken in the school districts by the families. Immigrants have lived and worked all over the world and come here with tremendous diversity in their skills and backgrounds and what brings them to this country, and also contribute tremendously to local economy. That we have a lot of data if you're interested to know exactly kind of how immigrants contribute to economy. There's a lot of information that we could give to you to help your future discussions. In the 2000 census, we also learned that South King County is, of course, seen a dramatic shift in the immigrant communities because of cost of housing, because of concentration of other communities, that this is where the majority of immigrant communities are living, is South King County. I have not personally seen specific data, but we know from in the last couple of years in Bellevue, they just did a recent research that showed that 1 out of every 4 people who live in the city of Seattle are foreign-born. So this is just to tell you that things are changing, right? Which you've probably noticed already. But this is some of the data that supports that. So some of what we have in place over the last few years to support immigrant communities is in 2009, King County adopted Ordinance 16692 for sheriff and public health. The ordinance adopts this policy for the sheriff's office that individuals will not be arrested or detained based on any warrant seeking the arrest of an individual based on their immigration status, right? And sheriff will not ask about people's immigration status. We'll get into this more with Tim and his legal expertise to talk about some of the issues that have come up about this. But this ordinance has been in place for almost 10 years already. And also, this ordinance states that otherwise required by law, any county office, department, employee, agency shall not deny access to services to individuals based on their immigration status. So when you go to public health, of course, we know that King County Public Health has some needs for which they might say, what are the last countries you've been to? Because perhaps they're testing for TB, for example, right? But they will not ask you about your immigration status, and they cannot say, we can't offer you services because you're not a U.S. citizen. Sorry, I went backwards. Okay, so also in 2010 and 2014, King County adopted language access ordinance, which is more about translation of materials. If you need a copy of this, I'm happy to send it to you, but it's based on a 3-tier language map that shows what are the populations that are highly concentrated with, I believe, the more than 5% of the population primary language other than English and Spanish. Then if that is the case, then in King County, we are mandated to translate materials. For example, King County Elections has to translate materials for communities in languages so that it is accessible to people. All right? The next one is for detainers, and Tim again will talk a lot more about this, but Ordinance 17886, Immigration and Customs Enforcement detainers, an ordinance that severely limits the ability of U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement from detaining any individual who's in the custody of King County Department of Adult and Juvenile Detention. This ordinance restricts the Department of Adult and Juvenile Detention from honoring civil immigration detainers except for individuals who have committed one or more violent crimes. Make sense? If it doesn't, ask a question and Tim will answer it, and I can answer it too. But both of us together, we can explain a lot more about what this means. Also, King County has adopted a welcoming statement, which is about honoring all of our diversity and wanting to be a beacon of opportunity and hope for all of the people who live in King County, and making sure that we have a lens of equity and social justice to all of the work that the county does. Voting rights, of course, was also adopted in 2015 to expand from Chinese and Vietnamese to include Spanish and Korean in all of the languages for a King County election. And executive declared support for Syrian refugees also in 2015. All right. I have a little cartoon here for you, which only would be funny if you could see all the words, which is so small that I cannot even see it myself. But this just basically, this cartoon tells you this, that a lot of people want to be heard. People want to have a voice. That's the thing that I hear most often from immigrant and refugee community members, that we want to have a voice, we want to be a part of the fabric of this community, and that we're not heard. So as he's saying that, the reporter is asking him a completely unrelated question, right? Okay.
Is that the Auburn reporter?
Of course not. Of course not. Okay, so just real quickly, I'm going to go through this really fast, that over the last year and a half, King County did a really extensive research study, and we interviewed about 550 members of immigrant communities and did 25 focus group meetings to ask people about the, how are you feeling? What are the barriers to services? What are the top problems? What are the top solutions? And out of that came a report that I'd love for you to read if you have time. I'm happy to send it to you.
What was some of them?
That's my next slide. The major theme, the desire to be connected, engaged, healthy, and successful. People come to this country for an opportunity. People like me come here because we want to do well and we want our kids to do well. We're willing to struggle, we're willing to work really hard and do everything possible so our kids can be safe in this country and to have a good education and contribute to the society. That's why I live here. And I raised my kids in King County myself, right? And so we heard this from a lot of people, and the common barriers that people face is discrimination, language and cultural issues, difficulty understanding and navigating systems, because a lot of the times we heard people are kind of just like, go to this office, go to that office, ask this question from this person, from that person, and just never finding where is the right person and what's the right solution. Insufficient resources and invisibility of communities. This was certainly true in unincorporated areas of King County and in some of the smaller cities where resources are a lot less than Seattle. We heard a lot of this. That, of course, in Seattle, for example, transportation or even legal services is much more available. And so outside of the city and in unincorporated areas, people had no idea about where to turn to. So I just included a couple of quotes from this study. Before I respond to this question, a person said, I would like to know what the county is going to do with this data that they are collecting from this focus group. As community, we are concerned about folks coming into our communities to collect data, but never come back with any solutions. I'm sure you've heard this a lot. But person after person after person, as I was interviewing them for an entire year, said, so many times we're asked our opinions about transportation, about workforce development, but nobody does anything with this information, so why are you asking again? We don't call the police when we have a problem because they don't treat us with respect and dignity. We heard this a lot. And this was the issue that came up especially from the Somali community, from the black-skinned immigrant community that repeatedly felt like they were targeted, they were profiled, they were not treated with respect. The police need to meet our community to see that we are hardworking people that respect the law. We are not criminals. I put these quotes here not because they were the only person who said this, but because this was a huge theme. All right, so real quickly, the community's ideas about how to address all of the problems that came up, the solutions proposed were investing in immigrant and refugee communities, integration, and civic engagement, right? Really bringing us into the life of the cities, teaching us how to vote, having things in languages about voting, being a life of the city, increased government responsiveness, addressing issues related to immigration status, which you'll see that is, of course, this was all information before the 2016 November elections, right? Okay, so based on all of the information that we got, Dow Constantine decided a few things. Number one, a commission of immigrants or refugees for the entire King County that would not be a bureaucratic body, but would have meetings all over the county to hear from immigrant communities and to be actually holding the county accountable. Staff, I am the first of that staff. I am a person who's going to work with his office to help figure out the strategy for future. And then focus on differing needs in suburban and unincorporated areas, which I know that sometimes, like smaller cities don't like you're not just a suburb, you are a city. So we acknowledge this, that there's some differences in language too. Okay, so recommendation also to Dow Constantine was to stay connected, community engagement and feedback loop to keep that alive so that people feel like the information that they gave us was actually important and we continue to hear. And then this concept of a hub that came up a lot because people kept saying there are so many organizations in the community that do, for example, housing, but they don't work together. There are so many organizations that do issues for youth leadership, but they don't work together. So how could the county really create a hub of immigrants and refugee services who really, with the county, with the call from the county, come together to coordinate, collaborate, and do a much better job of serving the needs of the community. All right. And now the new threats to the community. Many of the community residents are faced with threats and potential threats of deportation and heightened racial profiling in the name of immigration enforcement, and others experience explicit discrimination or crimes of hate based on national origin and religion. Is this where I stop and turn it over to you?
I think so. We'll find out at the next slide.
Yeah. Oh, $1.5 million. And Tim is one of the people who is providing those services through Northwest Immigrant Rights Project, and I'm sure he will talk about that. But we've also done a lot of funding for small community service organizations in King County, and many of them are in Auburn, Burien, SeaTac, Tukwila, so South King County is highly represented in this funding. All right.
Great. Thank you. So I'm going to try to give a little bit of a legal perspective and also sort of an update from what we see. So like I said, I am the directing attorney for the Tacoma office of the Northwest Immigrant Rights Project. And so our Tacoma office focuses on two different things. So it focuses on people who are detained at the Northwest Detention Center. So there's a big immigration detention center in Tacoma. It's one of the largest ones in the country. There's space for almost 1,600 people there. And so we focus on serving folks who are detained there by immigration and trying to get them back and released to their families. We also serve the Pierce County and the South Sound region for folks who aren't detained out of that office. As an organization, we have 4 offices across the state, including Seattle, Tacoma, and then Wenatchee and Granger. So I want to talk a little bit about what we've seen at the detention center in terms of enforcement across our region. It has increased this year. There's some numbers there, right? So went up 33% from the same period last year in the first 100 days. And so these are folks who are living in our communities, right, who are picked up. And I think sometimes what can be missed in some of the rhetoric is who is picked up, right? So these are folks who are undocumented, right, which I think is the sort of common story. But I think they're also folks I know they are people with status. So they have lawful permanent residence or green cards, sometimes for many years, and then can be deported, usually for some type of criminal conviction. So, one client I have right now is he's a veteran, actually. He served in Iraq. He has been in the United States since 1981 when he came when he was 5, and he had a green card. He came with his parents with status, and after serving, he got released and ended up, not the only veteran who ended up falling into drugs, right, and got addicted to drugs, to methamphetamine, and got convicted of several things while he was high. And now is facing deportation back to a country that he doesn't speak the language, and one of the most sort of ironic pieces, I guess, about his case is that he actually, after a conviction in 2016, he actually got really in-house rehab through the Veterans Administration, and got clean. He actually got the treatment through the VA, got clean, was actually working at the VA and doing really well, and then ICE called him, and he obeys orders, and he went to their office, and they decided to take him in, and he's still detained in Tacoma. It's been about 8 months. So I think sometimes the narrative, right, of who's detained, right, and who enforcement targets is not always the same, right, as what's really happening. I think there were questions about does this impact Auburn, right? Is this something that actually happens in Auburn? And, you know, I don't work for ICE, so I can't tell you for sure. But I can tell you that I know that our office has helped people who were detained in Auburn. And there's actually this report track, and the link is there, but it's a sort of research organizations out of the University of Syracuse. But they just pull data out of the immigration court system. So they're just pulling government data, and then they make fancy maps and different data stuff that out of it. But they recently released a report that shows where people who are in the immigration court process, right? So immigration detains you, you get put in the court process to just see if you'll be deported, or if you actually have the law provides you under the law a chance to stay in the United States, right? So not everyone who's here undocumented or with documents doesn't, under the law, there still might be a chance for them to stay, right? Which is where the lawyers often come in, right? But in the track data, there's right now, right, actively 446 cases, which show an Auburn Federal Way area, and it breaks it down by sort of district, so it doesn't do it by city. So I couldn't tell you exactly which one, but assumedly a number of those are in Auburn. And of those, right, 23 were filed in just the last 3 months, right? So we're talking about something that continues to happen in Auburn and around, right? And it would be unusual, right, if one city was sort of left out of enforcement.
Now, Tim, were those 23, and you mentioned some were from Auburn, did they get detained and arrested at SCORE? Did they get apprehended after they got out of SCORE, or do you know?
Yeah, we don't have any. That's a great question, right? In terms of how those happened, and the data there doesn't show. It's just from the court system, so the court's just sort of charging documents and doesn't record sort of where those, where folks would have been apprehended. So yeah, a good question, and I'm not sure.
Do you mean while they were at SCORE, they were taken to detention?
Well, I was just curious, out of those, where were they apprehended?
Right.
You said they were detained, and were they apprehended after they got released, or at home, or,
Yeah, so SCORE will not detain anyone for lack of documentation, simply for a hold or a detain. If there is a felony warrant, they will, but Auburn Police nor will SCORE hold solely based on, we want you to detain this person. They just won't do it. They're aware of the database that the people are in, and if they know when they are being released, but SCORE does not detain.
Yes, Mr. Pelosi.
So, tell me, this Iraq vet.
Yeah.
Is ICE at all flexible?
Well, he's still detained, so no. At least in this case, I don't know what to tell you.
Would it
Yeah.
help for any veterans groups to advocate on his behalf?
Yeah, the interesting thing is actually that they have been in his case. It's been actually really amazing to see. A lot of the folks he served with, and folks he was in a bunch of support groups for other veterans who are trying to stay sober and clean, and a bunch of them have rallied together and really shown up in a big way for him. Gotten petitions together, talked to their elected officials, shown up for his hearings. So far, that hasn't made the difference. I mean, I think that is one of the things that feels like it has changed this year, right? Is that there is less flexibility, and I think and this is one of the things you can see in some of that data there as well in terms of prioritization, right? So, like any prosecutor, there is prioritization that has happened, right? Prosecutors have that ability, right, to sort of, someone's jaywalking, well, I'm going to decide to instead go after the person who's, just robbed the bank, right? I'm going to have to make that decision because we only have so many, police officers and so many prosecutors. And what has happened since January is that prioritization has sort of disappeared, right? So rather than we're gonna it's a veteran, we're gonna let that one go. That may have been something that happened, or right, here's this person, we came across them, they may be undocumented, but they have no criminal record, right? They have a U.S. citizen spouse and child, right? Again, that was something that that I think more often than not under the prior administration was something that they would have made that decision. They could have made that decision, right? And I think now that's not a decision that they're that sort of the field officers are really able to make. So that's a change.
So I don't want to.
Yeah, no, it's okay.
So you know his case real well, it sounds like.
I do.
Okay. So what I like to do after this meeting, I want to connect with you.
Sure.
And we'll go from there.
Great. That sounds good. Thank you. So, so I wanted to talk a little bit. Yeah, we'll keep going. So, I think one of the things that we hear, right, is different jurisdictions sort of wanting to respond. There's a great amount of fear, right? We heard that from both in the immigrant community, right? And I think that from talking to folks from various jurisdictions, I think it's maybe no one likes people in their community to be afraid, right? But I think that it goes beyond just sort of a desire to end fear, and it goes to a sort of a realization that all of our communities are made less safe when people don't have any trust in sort of local government, right? And so, if people are afraid to go to the police because they think that could lead to, immigration consequences, that's not only less safe maybe for them and their communities, but they are, witnesses to crimes, right? And that affects everyone, right? And the data that has come out this year on sort of how that has changed is frightening. There's data out of a number of cities that reporting of domestic violence in Latino communities has dropped by a third, right? And that's not that there all of a sudden is less domestic violence, right? That is that people are afraid to call and report. So, that's just sort of one example, but that type of fear where people are afraid to involve themselves, right? And this is with police, but it could also be with, if I'm sick, do I feel confident that I can go to the hospital, right? And be safe. And some may or may not be based in what the practice is on the ground, right? The hospital staff has not been calling immigration, but that there is a fear, and it's a fear based in, right? We saw the enforcement numbers. It is a fear based in a reality that enforcement in the Northwest, right, has picked up dramatically.
Can I add that in King County we're seeing wage theft as an issue that is just huge right now, and a lot of members of immigrant community are reporting to their own community organizations. Let's say it's the Ethiopian community organization. They say, my employer is not willing to pay me, but I'm too scared to come forward and call, let's say, the Office of Labor Standards or whoever. I don't want to report because they might report me to ICE. So this is a type of issue that, because of fear and anxiety, there are people who are taking advantage of it, and then immigrant community members are really too scared to come forward.
And so I think local jurisdictions sort of seeing that, right? So seeing the fear, seeing how it affects their communities, have wanted to sort of step up and get involved and be clear about what the role is, that separation of sort of the local government role versus the federal government role. And I think a number of places, at the same time, right, have expressed, a clear desire not to violate federal law while doing that, right? I think that's an important thing, and is certainly something that's been in the news a lot, and there's an awful lot of coverage on. And so I wanted to try to get into a little bit of the details on that. There's also really great guidance from the Attorney General of Washington around immigration enforcement. There's the link there. We could certainly share it as well. But that's a nice resource. It's a pretty in-depth guide from that office, who have smarter lawyers than I am. So, so a good place to look. But I'll try to go. So, so sort of what does federal law prohibit? And so I think that some of the conversations around, you know, what people call sanctuary cities or you know, various ordinances that prohibit local involvement with federal immigration enforcement, you know, I think kind of misses the issue in terms of what the federal law actually prohibits. And there are prohibitions in the federal law in terms of what cities can limit, right? And so this section 1373 does prohibit cities from limiting communication, right? So a city cannot put in place an ordinance that says city officers, city employees, you cannot communicate with ICE, right? A city cannot put that in place, right? So that's really clear. And actually, there's no jurisdiction in Washington State, right? No jurisdiction, as far as I know, I think anywhere in the country that does that, right? That's very clear. That's a violation of federal law. So that's not sort of what the discussion is around. And I think any ordinance, right, that would, you know, you would want to consider would not want to do that, right? Because that would be a violation of federal law, right? Certainly not something a lawyer will tell you to do, right? So, you know, what the discussion has been around is and I think they've sort of used some of this language to try to sort of shift the focus, but the executive orders have been focused on jurisdictions that simply don't want to use their local monies, right, to do immigration enforcement. And so I think, and that actually is something that under the Constitution, the federal government can't force cities to do, right? So the 10th Amendment to the Constitution, you know, one of the original parts of the Bill of Rights, right, sets up this pretty clear rule that's been sustained over the years by the Supreme Court that, you know, the federal government, you know, its laws are sort of supreme, but it also can't force local governments to spend, it's called commandeering, right? So to spend the local resources for federal efforts, right? So you can't sort of tell a local city, hey, you're going to do what we want you to do because we're the federal government, right? Seems like a pretty decent rule, and again, one that's been held up over many, many years. And so that's why, you know, in the courts right now, right, some of the lawsuits around the threats by the administration to take away federal funding, so far, all the courts have enjoined any withholding of those funds based on that reading, right? So a number of courts around the country have found that it's you know, substantially likely is the language that the cities will win because they're not allowed to threaten, the federal government's not allowed to commandeer those local resources and say, hey, you know, local city, local county, you know, you're going to do what we want you to do or else, you know, we won't give you the money that we would have been giving you anyways. So, so that's a little bit of the legal background on that. So there's some interesting data on sort of sanctuary cities or cities that call themselves that or are called that versus non-sanctuary. You know, there's a lot of different data on this. I mean, I think that, you know, some of these, that is the data. I think it's unclear if all of it is causation versus correlation, right? I don't want to sort of overstate, you know, that, you know, it's, you know, flipping of the switch and you know, the sun just shines a little brighter. But I do think that what ordinances that you know, that, and there's ways to limit involvement, again, without limiting that communication, right? And so I think putting into place, and it sounds like there's some practices in place that are already doing some of this, right? And I think that when I've thought about and talked to other jurisdictions about why sort of ordinances can be important, right? Because I think many places have positive practices, right? Their police already have practices in place not to communicate, or you know, their jails may not honor a detainer that's not based on probable cause, right? On a warrant, and I think that it's part that you put into place a law, right? This says this is the law, and it's not changing, right? And so one is sort of a surety that this is going to happen. But I think the other piece that's really important is that it's a statement to, you know, again, we talked about how much fear there is in communities, and what it does to people's ability to interact with their cities and to access services when they need them, right? Like calling the police. And a statement from the council, from the city, that says, you know what, like this is what we're not doing, right? We're not doing these things. They may have been our policies anyways, but we're making a public stance so that you know that these things are true. And again, with the hope that that decreases that fear and gives people the chance to access those services. So I think it's not just, it may not in the end be a change in policy, right, if those are the practices on the ground, but it does make a difference then. I mean, to some extent, it's an easier pull, right? If it's already what's happening on the ground, then there's not really a change, besides making the important statement that, we do want you to feel safer calling the police. We do want you to you see a crime, we want you to feel like you can call us, and that's going to not lead to bad things, right? So that's, I think, just one of the pieces I want to cover. And yeah, I think we'll try to open for questions here. I mean, I can talk more in detail about various pieces of ordinances and why practices like the ones it sounds like there already are in place at SCORE are a good idea, because not detaining people on probable cause is an important part of our Constitution, right? I mean, one of the cases around the country that really caught my attention was there's a case out of Miami where a young man was coming out of jail, out of the county jail. I don't know what he'd been convicted for. And he was his time there was ending, and ICE called up the county jail and said, we want you to hold this guy past the time that he's supposed to be released. No federal warrant, right? So no probable cause testing, right? But they just said, look, we're ICE, we're law enforcement. You should trust us. You should keep him. And so the county jail kept him to be nice to ICE, and paid for him to stay there for another couple days. And then ICE comes and gets him, 48 hours-ish later, and takes him to the ICE office. And turned out, right, this man who'd been held there for another couple days, turns out he was a U.S. citizen. That ICE, had gotten that wrong, right? And so, I'm, come from an immigrant family, but I'm not an immigrant myself. And I think seeing someone, right, who is a U.S. citizen, right, and that, you understand, like, why the Constitution has sort of the testing for probable cause as a key requirement for keeping people locked up, right? It's nice to have a judge, right, have a chance to look at something and make sure there's at least some probable cause before you lock someone up, right? And that you give a lot of sort of chances for error when you don't require that, right? And that's sort of a risk to everyone, right? It's not just a risk to folks who are immigrants. So again, that's just one example that caught my eye. I mean, recently, a federal court in the Eastern District of Washington found that it was unconstitutional as well, and cities and counties around the country have had to pay damages, right, to folks who they've held, right, which has certainly, I think counties are saying, wait, we have to pay to hold people longer, and then we have to pay damages if we mess up, right? I think that's a pretty powerful deterrent. But I think I'll stop talking.
If I could just add
to any questions?
Just one last thing for me to also reinforce that, yes, because of the fear and anxiety that we've both spoken about, and also because of this both kind of the abuse, for example, the wage theft issue that we shared with you, and the kind of the unpredictability of all the things that are happening right now. I really stress to all of the cities in King County that we really like for you to consider an ordinance that keeps your communities safe, and that it gives them the message that they are welcome and that you're looking out for them and you're aware of this heightened anxiety So King County is actually in the process of working right now on a model ordinance with a group of nonprofit organizations that have proposed this model ordinance to us to take what we have in place, but to go further. So we're going through the process of adopting that ourselves as well.
Mr. Holman?
Yes, Tim, you said that your Northwest Immigrant Rights Project did some outreach and education as part of your mission. One of the things that we as a council have been speaking about since we passed our model ordinance on being in a welcoming, accepting city. Resolution, pardon me, was an outreach education program for our immigrant community and their, pardon me, and their families. What would you be able to offer?
Yeah. I mean, we do outreach events around the state, and so I'm happy to share information. We actually have on our website. There's a way to sort of request an outreach event, and you know, there are many requests, and so it's, you know, we can't do it tomorrow, but we try to get out to different areas, and I know we've done a number and I don't have, again, we've done, I think, you know, just this year, I would say over 100 around the state, so I don't know all of them off the top of my head, but I would guess we've done a number in the South King County area. But yeah, if you again, we are happy to take requests for more, and you know, I was down in Longview earlier in the year. We've been out. We were just out in Aberdeen recently. I mean, we try to get to all of the communities, and certainly Auburn would be one of them. So
And
Tim, I
ACLU
went-
and Colectivo Legal. There are
I went
others.
to one of your 101 training in Tacoma at the WSU.
Oh, that's right.
Facility, and I was really impressed on all the information you guys shared. And when I saw Jorge and his other partner do the training, that's when I wanted him to come to Auburn and do a training. There's another lady, Leticia Ostos, her and her husband would like also to be part of that and bring it into Auburn. So we'll talk about that after that, but I really enjoyed the training you guys gave.
I wonder if we can talk about the difference between a resolution and an ordinance, since that's come up. I know you just spoke about this, but if you could say one more time, we could highlight that what you have in place is a resolution, and it's different than an ordinance. We're all on the same page about that?
Yes.
Long discussion about
Yeah.
that.
Yes.
We had a 6-week ad hoc committee on that, and it was
Yes.
going back and forth and came down to a resolution.
Okay, great.
Mr. DeCoursey?
I'm glad to hear that King County's put $1 million into a fund to assist undocumented immigrants, because to me, one of the major problems we have is the overburdening federal government regulations that prevent people from becoming documented, from becoming citizens. Now, none of us are going to fix that, at least not in the short term. But I think it's important to be able to do the outreach to the immigrant community, to allow them to have the resources they need to move as quickly as they can toward becoming naturalized citizens in this country, because I think some of them, if not a lot of them, shy away from that because it takes forever to do it. During our months of discussion of this process that we went through, I talked about my grandson who was an immigrant. When he came to this country in 1898, all he had to do was be here for 5 years, not get into trouble, not be arrested for anything, and have a job and live cleanly, and he became a citizen. That's how simple it was in 1898, in the early 1900s, compared to today, where it takes years and years and years and years for these folks to go through the process. So I think collectively, all of us together, what we can do to assist the community in educating, informing, providing resources to get them through that paperwork as quickly as possible is what we all need to do together.
I think that's a really good point. As someone who deals with it all the time, I think you're right? The laws are, don't provide a path for everyone at this point. And that maybe is something that needs to be changed federally, right? But that's not what we're changing, right? We can't do that. But under the laws that do exist right now, right, folks may have a chance. And I think you're right that providing that opportunity to see, do the laws provide that chance, is a really important thing that local jurisdiction can be involved in.
The city of Tacoma has just also passed a legal defense fund. And theirs, I believe, they passed $50,000, and they're asking a community to match it to have $100,000 to give. So and the $1 million for King County Legal Defense. One of the things that really made a big difference for the King County Council and Dow Constantine was just learning how much a person's chances in detention improve by just having a lawyer. Mm-hmm. Having legal representation increases a person's chance of being able to get out by 3 times. And so,
actually, much more than that.
It's more than 3 times, right?
There was just some actually, because New York City actually funded immigration, a defender, right? Like a public defender in an immigration court for everyone in New York City. And so they actually have really sort of interesting and good data, right? Because they went from very, very few people having lawyers to suddenly everyone having a lawyer. And where they represent everyone. That includes some people who maybe the laws don't provide any chance at all for, and some people who, are like, well, I don't have a chance, I'm just going to go, right? They're not even going to try to sort of fight the case. But even including all of that, a lawyer made somewhere between 11 and 12 times difference having a lawyer in court. So enormous change. So, yeah.
Mr. Wagner.
I noticed as you talked about kind of the ground rules of your organization, you said you serve low-income people. Why not serve everybody?
That's a great question. So I think I guess the base of it would be that there are private immigration lawyers, right? And so if you have more resources, you can hire one of them, right? And so where the need, we have limited resources, right? And we get donations and grants from people, and so in order to use that in the way that sort of has the most impact, right? Folks who are already going to be able to pay for a lawyer, we're happy to let the market, they can go to the private market, right, and hire an immigration lawyer.
I would bet there's a lot of people in the middle there, from the ones that can't afford it to the ones that can't.
Right.
But just, they can't pay their rent if they have to pay a lawyer.
Right.
And so, you're probably looking for money from all kinds of people, and might even be from us. How flexible is your operating procedure to serve other categories than low income?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I mean, we go up to 200% of the poverty guidelines. In many of our services. So it is. I mean, are there people at 201 who maybe? I mean, I don't think, right? I think life is complicated, right? And I think, but in general, I mean, we're not turning people away because of an inability to pay, and certainly like if your taxes last year took you over, but right now, you had an accident and you can't be working, right? We certainly take that kind of situation into account.
Okay.
Any other questions for us? Any comments? Any of the information that we talked about, we're happy to send you links.
I would like to know more about the hubs.
Yes.
You talked about the
Sure,
hub.
absolutely. And we brought you some handouts and also some flyers to tell you we'd love for you to pass out to people that need the legal defense fund, people who that some of that $1.5 million can go to support the legal services they need, and some of the flyers of NERP. And I brought these posters, the All Are Welcome Here. We'd love to see you post this in City Hall, in other public areas in your city to welcome communities. Thank you all for your work.
Thank you for
Thanks
coming.
for inviting us.
And we'll talk about the training.
I would love to.
Thank you.
some of these posters with you?
Please.
And yeah.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely, thank you.
Nice to have them here when we had all the
The president is there, and talk more about the simulation.
You can use the mouse right here.
That is about, because in two-thirds say simulation is
Were there other
German language churches. On most things, you
We've
try
got
to
6 seconds to sing. Bye.
Okay, we can do it.
Thank you. Okay, Ms. Higman.
Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for having us. It's time for our annual CDBG Action Plan presentation, so we can set our public hearing in place and next month ideally gain council approval for our 2018 plan. For those of you that don't know, I would like you to meet Joy Scott. Some of you have, actually you all have met her before in a different role, and we stole her away. She is our new human services manager. And I will let Joy explain some of the things that we are proposing for our action plan update. Not a lot of changes, so hopefully we won't keep you too terribly long. So, Joy.
Thank you so much. I will try to be brief because I know you've had a lot on your plate already for this evening. But I'm very excited to be here in my new capacity as Human Services Manager for Auburn. I thought that this would be a good opportunity to just revisit a little bit of an overview of the Community Development Block Grant program and how Auburn utilizes it, partially because it's somewhat new to me to be in this role with Auburn, so it's a good opportunity for us together to go through this. So as you're all aware, the CDBG program provides annual grants on a formula basis. So Congress determines that formula that determines the amount of funds that entitled cities receive. Auburn is one of those entitlement cities and is able to execute projects that align with HUD's national objectives and are eligible under the guidelines that they set at a federal level that are all meant to benefit low and moderate income persons. So I have here, I won't go through the whole list, but HUD sets out a number of opportunities for cities to be able to use these funds. I think one thing to keep in mind is that while all of these are possible, they all come with a number of hoops to be able to actually execute them. So this is not a complete list, but you do have to do a lot of different things in order for this to be eligible for the particular project that you want. And I'll go through and highlight some examples of how Auburn has used CDBG funds in the past and how it's currently being used in the city as well.
Do we have that in our packet?
You do, yes. It's after the actual text of the action plan. You have a copy of the PowerPoint presentation.
It's at the back section.
Oh, okay.
Towards the very end. You know that the text is a little bit small on the screens here, so if there's anything you're not able to make out, just let me know. So some projects that Auburn has been able to carry out with CDBG funds include the Housing Repair Program, which is an ongoing program. I have some pictures in here to show the types of projects that are funded for homeowners in Auburn, low and moderate income homeowners. Employment training programs, providing some funding so that additional health care is available to under and uninsured Auburn residents. Small business assistance. The current renovations, I know most folks are aware that the bathrooms are currently closed at Lesko. When they open again in the spring, they will be ADA accessible. So those types of repairs are a great example of how CDBG dollars can be put to work in our community. Currently, we're working on the downtown business facade improvement project, which falls under the economic development category of CDBG, and also previous Shaughnessy Park improvements. So I wanted to show some examples of how CDBG dollars are used in the community. I think that when you look at the long list of laundry list, really, of projects that are available, it can sometimes be hard to contextualize what that looks like on the ground for residents of our community. So I'm sure many of you know Duana Richards, who is fantastic and runs the housing repair program for Auburn. She provided some before and after pictures of the types of projects that she works with using CDBG dollars. This is a before and after that was really both about safety and weatherization. You know, the door was certainly not a safe structure for the house, but also was not keeping out the elements. And that's the before and then after the housing repair program. Things like water heaters, furnaces are also a significant portion of what homeowners are able to access in the housing repair program. It supports, you know, safety and accessibility, and also basic needs in the structure. So heat is one of those, and hot water, the ability to cook, things like that. And I wanted to highlight this roof because roofs have been one of the biggest needs this year. My understanding is that they're kind of trends of what Duana sees in the program. Sometimes there's a year where there's a lot of stoves needed, or a lot of water heaters, a lot of furnaces. This year it's been quite a number of roofs. It's an ongoing issue, certainly with our climate, but it really makes a huge difference, not only for the immediate safety and comfort of the residents, but also it improves the energy efficiency, and it lowers the cost of living there. And it's often one of the ways that folks are able to age in place and remain in their homes when they have these basic needs met through the program. So CDBG comes with a number of requirements. And I think that it's good to keep in mind that right now we are working under the 2015 to 2019 consolidated plan. So every 5 years there is a strategic plan that we submit that's developed in the city. I know that you know, council has a process in that as well. But once we're in that plan, we're kind of limited by what we said were going to be our priority areas. So we develop the action plans each year based on what we said we were going to accomplish in that 5-year plan. And that's also done in conjunction with the county and other cities.
What did you say the years were?
2015 through 2019. The next one will be starting in 2020.
Okay.
So there are other pieces of the administration of CDBG that falls to staff in Auburn, falls to myself and folks on my team. It includes our annual performance report, where we demonstrate to HUD how we've used the funds and how many people have been served. And we also demonstrate that requirement of the percentage of low and moderate income households as an overall proportion of who receives services. Monitoring any subrecipients, managing the finances. There's quite a lot of database and record keeping that's a piece of this, and managing projects as they come. So projects that require that kind of infrastructure and development have environmental reviews. There are procurement procedures that we have to follow. In some of the housing repair, lead mitigation and abatement is an issue as well. But the piece that we're talking about tonight, for the most part, is the annual action plan. So every year we have to lay out, based on a best guess of how many funds we're going to be receiving for the following year, how we intend to spend them. That helps us meet those goals in the consolidated plan. So you do have the full action plan in your packets. I don't know if it's kind of a lengthy and dry document. I don't know if you were able to get a chance to read it, but just in case, I wanted to just provide an overview of what we are proposing. It's not significantly different from previous years, as we're still working towards those overarching goals. But our best guess of the amount that we'll receive is $428,078. That's the amount that we're working with this year. So we usually just go with the amount that we have right now for the following year and adjust as we receive the more accurate version, probably in the first quarter of 2018. Public services. is one of the categories that we can put funds towards, but it is subject to a 15% cap. So we're not able to provide more than 15% of that annual allocation to something that is service-based. And usually that's funding agencies that have staff that are directly working with folks. But we are proposing continuing our funding at Health Point and at Multi-Service Center. So medical and dental care for un- and underinsured Auburn residents, and job training services for low to moderate income Auburn residents. CDBG funds have to go towards Auburn residents. If they're not residents of Auburn, then they are not eligible to receive services with these funds.
Councilmember Pelosa.
First bullet, 428, and the second bullet, 15, is that 15% off the 428?
So we are not able to exceed 15% total of the 428. The 42,500 is not 15%. I just wanted to put that in there so folks know we couldn't, we couldn't throw $100,000 in there because it is subject to a cap.
Okay.
One of the slight changes that we're proposing to make for next year is increasing the amount of funding that goes towards housing repair. Initially, there was $249,000 allocated for housing repair this year. I believe during a action plan amendment later in the year, there was another $20,000 that was given to that program. The program is currently out of funds because it is in such high demand. It's something that is really needed by Auburn residents and that is extremely popular even with very limited outreach.
How do we select the homeowners?
They usually come to us.
Yeah.
I mean, we do advertise it slightly, but they usually come to us, and then if they qualify based on their income and other factors, then.
Yeah. And, it really, as applications come in, do want to process them as quickly as possible.
Councilmember Baggett.
Real quick one on that same subject. How do we determine what is the low to moderate income? Is there a range?
Yeah, that's a determination by HUD. So they provide the kind of income levels for your region, and that's what you're required to use.
Do we have guidelines that say what that low to moderate income should be?
I can get those for you if you're interested.
Councilmember Wagner.
It's part of the Finance Committee reviewing the bills. I see these housing repair bills, and they tend to run $5,000 to $9,000 because they're plumbing and roofs, expensive operations. And so you're barely going to fit 50 of them into 300,000, I think. But a hot water heater is a couple hundred, so that balances out sometimes. But most of the ones I've seen are pretty big ones.
So this number is from the average grant to homeowners over the course of the last year. So we currently have served, I believe, 68 people this year, and that's with the 270 amount. So the average amount, I believe, was about $6,600 per household. Some fall below, some fall over that. But this was the kind of most accurate approximation by program staff of how many people would be served with this amount.
When you put at least 50, that makes it maybe you might be turning somebody down at the end, or turning down a $15,000 thing that's really needed. So I don't know. I don't know if I agree with the words "at least."
Yeah.
Councilmember Pelosa.
So when someone comes to the city for help, how do we determine that they need financial help? Do they fill a form out? Or?
Yeah, so if somebody is coming to the Community Services Division and is looking for resources to be able to fix their roof, fix their water heater, whatever it is, we let them know about this program, and there's an application process where they would provide documentation of income.
Thank you.
And then somebody goes out to their home and evaluates.
Yeah. there's a building inspector that would do that process. There's also inspectors that work on that lead side if there's going to be a potential for a lead hazard in the repair process.
Councilmember Wagner.
Who administers the contract? Is that you? Do you go out for bids and then pick the contractor?
Luana does that.
Luana does that.
For the housing repair program?
Yeah, housing repair.
Yeah.
Yeah, and she'll advertise every year. She has a list of contractors that will work with us. It's not the easiest thing in the world. I mean, they're small jobs. They're not going to make a ton of money off it, and a lot of her contractors are really just good-hearted people that want to take on what to them is a small plumbing job or something.
Yeah, and she follows, there are some pretty strict rules about how many bids she has to have before having that contract in place. She also tries very hard to use Auburn-based businesses whenever possible.
I hope she's not too restricted in the bidding process. You know, it can get in the way of getting the best deal if you have too many rules to live by. The people who just want to do it for be a good person. So I don't know how much freedom you have with a federal program like this to give Nuana some
Not as much as
flexibility.
Yeah.
More flexibility to give her the bid.
And sometimes it's difficult finding people to do the small projects right now because construction is, and those skills are in such high demand that it's difficult to find someone that's willing to do the small projects.
And did we?
Councilmember Baggett.
Just a quick question. Do you get many people that are in that category but are renters?
So this program is,
where they're having difficulty?
yeah, this program is only eligible for homeowners.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Councilmember DeCoursey and then Mr. Pelosi.
So is the work, the work fall into the job order contracting category?
Did we work the small works roster or the job order contracting into any of this work? I can't remember. It seems like there was a conversation, but I don't remember where it went.
In conversations, I don't think it's actually been effective yet.
And did we, as the conversation, that it would be advantageous if we could do that?
Yes, I think the question, there were some questions around federal standards and guidelines that Jacob was working, well, previously, Joy's predecessor, to make sure that we were consistent with those requirements, federal requirements.
Yeah.
I know in my history here, but we implemented a similar job order contracting program for housing authority. It wasn't quite called job order contracting, but usually task orders laid on in the bids for projects that were small in nature. So maybe something to explore if we need to, get you information on that as well.
Yeah.
The task order process works out really well. So
Okay, yeah, we would love that.
just for small contractors.
Mr. Pelosi.
Yeah, regarding handicap ramps,
Yep.
I've mentioned this before. I just thought I'd remind everybody that if you're dealing with a veteran, a ramp can be obtained through his doctor. So we don't have to use CDBG funds for a veteran, for a ramp.
And oftentimes, that's a great way to leverage the resources that are available if there are multiple needs. So it might be that they need a ramp, but also they don't have a functioning furnace. And so it means that they don't have to use up this money on just one thing if there's a way to get them more services. Right. Yeah.
Okay.
So we also have included in this administration money set aside to help defray the staff costs of managing these funds. That is subject to a 20% cap. This is, ever so slightly under that cap for this amount, just to kind of make the numbers work. Again, this is our best guess of the money that we're going to receive because they don't tell us until the first quarter of next year. Once we receive that final amount, if it's more than 15% off, then we would come back to council and discuss how that additional funding or reduced funding would be worked out.
So right now, what you're showing us is what you're going to come and ask us, you're asking us right now for?
So it's an excellent question, and yes, so I have a slide here to show the next steps. This initial presentation is to give you the information of what we currently have included in the action plan and make sure there aren't significant concerns or adjustments that would need to be made. We are required to have a public comment period of at least 30 days, not including upcoming holidays. And we have an ad that will be going out to the Seattle Times to make sure that that's known. We have copies available for the public. And then after the 30 days has passed, we'll be bringing this back to you at the December 18th with a resolution to approve the action plan.
Okay, so right now is the 428,078, and then on top of that will be the additionals that you
No.
have shown here, or just that right there?
That's the total
Okay.
So
amount.
what we
Okay.
believe we're going to get from HUD
All right.
is the 428, and
Okay.
so we need approval of the plan.
Thank you. Mr. Wagner?
And you advertising on the Auburn Reporter instead of the Seattle Times, seems like it'd be more likely to be read where it's a free one instead of somebody having to pay $40 a month for paper.
I think we can do it in addition to, the requirement for the Seattle Times is in our citizen participation plan because there is somewhere where it says it's the
That's our
official
paper
paper
of
of
record.
Auburn. So
We can issue a
could
press
do it.
release, though,
Yeah.
to the Auburn Reporter. They usually print them.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Also, you have
you
people
been-
in Pierce County as well, so the News Tribune might be also another alternative.
Sorry, Councilmember Trout, for speaking out of turn. Things going all kind of sideways.
I'm teasing.
We were on a roll here.
No, that's fine.
That we can certainly put something in addition in the Auburn Reporter.
I don't know about you, Rich, but I haven't been receiving the reporter. It's going on 3 months. We have not been getting it.
Shows up in my driveway every,
Yeah.
Ready?
It's all up and down our road. We have not been receiving it, so I don't know what happened.
Tell Robert.
He's gone. I was gonna say something. Okay, is there there's,
So the next draft of this will come to you before the December 18th council meeting. You can expect to see any public comments that have been received reflected in that draft. But until then, you'll see me again in about a month.
okay,
I don't have any other questions.
any further questions?
Next Monday, will we be passing a resolution for public hearing?
I believe we have it scheduled.
I don't know how that
in-
works.
That's not necessary.
That's not necessary? No, okay.
Not for this.
Okay, well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, now the matrix. Is there any changes or additions or?
I just went, this afternoon, Claude and I went through the Code Books and CDB community development one, and there's several things that will change, but it's nothing I need to outline here. And the original that will be updated through Kevin.
Okay. That's on the human development,
No,
public,
Code Works,
Okay.
Kevin,
okay. Yes,
Number 14, legal rights for undocumented residents. Looks like we had tonight just an idea of somebody we could ask.
yeah.
And then we can decide what sort of forum might work.
Okay. Anything else? Bill, what were you talking about bringing in, so you recommended that all of us go back and look at our list, and if we find an urgency to bring it forward?
No, I mentioned it. What I was looking at is, as we talked last time, it would be helpful, and Rich and I did this today, when you go through the list, because the list sometimes can be pretty exhaustive, prioritizing, kind of carrying out maybe some of those things that could perhaps be discussed with staff in there prior to bringing it to a study session, or in the sense of limiting the time frame within a study session for, just to give us some flexibility of how we look at our topics. I think it's important to prioritize topics and keep them prioritized in a significant order.
So the red pile is gonna get even bigger after our meeting this afternoon.
I saw that. Okay, if there's no other topics or any urgency, then the meeting's over.